Welcome to the Global WarWatch Network, and today you're diving into the deep dive. We're tackling a question that's probably been lurking in the back of your mind, maybe even keeping you up at night.
Mhm.
Are we truly on the verge of World War III? We've gathered a compelling stack of sources to extract the most critical insights for you, cutting through the noise and connecting some genuinely startling dots.
Yeah, our deep dive today is built on a pretty robust range of authoritative sources. We've got in-depth geopolitical analyses from places like the European Leadership Network and Japan's National Institute for Defense Studies.
Okay.
And then there's breaking news reports from The Week, Legit.ing, Anadolu Ajansa. We even looked into, public discourse around security alliances like NATO, pulling stuff from platforms like TikTok. So it's a really comprehensive look.
Right. So our mission here is to distill the core strategies, the risks from these powerful nations. We want to help you understand not just what is happening globally, but why it matters.
Exactly, and what the potential implications are for, the international order and ultimately for you listening.
We'll be unpacking these escalating tensions across multiple flashpoints,
Yeah.
Eastern Europe, the Middle East, the Asia-Pacific, and looking at that complex interplay between the major powers, Russia, China, the U.S. It's a high-stakes global chess match, really.
And every move has ripple effects.
Hmm.
So let's dive right in. To really get a handle on the dynamics of potential global conflict, we have to start, I think, where so much of the current tension originates: Russia's strategic aims in Europe. Our sources suggest there's, a real concern about their intentions there.
That's right. The analysis definitely points to growing unease. After some battlefield setbacks, Putin apparently hoped the Middle East unrest would sort of distract the West from Ukraine.
Right, divert attention.
Yeah. But with the fighting dragging on, the fears are now growing about an emboldened Kremlin, or maybe a cornered one.
It is, and he specifically mentioned Putin might be eyeing the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, all NATO members, of course, and formerly part of the Soviet Union.
It's a really stark warning.
Yeah.
So how are countries, on the front lines, how are they preparing? Is it genuinely this prepare for war to preserve peace idea, or maybe more of a strategic posture?
Well, it seems like a bit of both, based on the sources. The fear feels genuine, especially given history, but the signaling is absolutely key. Look at the Baltic states, Poland, Finland. They're all withdrawing from a major landmine treaty specifically to beef up their border defenses with Russia.
Okay, so concrete actions.
Exactly. Rhett's message to NATO is blunt. To preserve peace, we must prepare for war. He's pushing for more defense spending. It's not just talk. They're making tangible moves. And then there's this. Russia has started ramping up production of hypersonic missiles.
Yes, the hypersonics.
Right. These aren't just fast. They're incredibly hard to track, hard to intercept because they maneuver at such high speeds. They're intermediate range, capable of hitting targets up to, 3,415 miles away. That puts pretty much all of Europe, even parts of the western U.S., potentially in range.
Wow. That really shifts the deterrence picture, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah.
But the big question, obviously, is what if deterrence fails?
Yeah.
If Russia did attack a NATO member, what happens then? What are the mechanisms? Article 4, Article 5? How do they actually work?
Okay, so this gets to the core of NATO. Article 4, that gets triggered if a member feels its territorial integrity, political independence, or security is under threat. That kicks off consultations, could lead to joint action. It's been used 7 times since '49, most recently in March 2022, right after the Ukraine invasion, by the Eastern European and Baltic members.
Okay, so consultations first.
Right. Then you have Article 5, that's the big one, the Mutual Defense Clause. An attack on one is an attack on all. But here's the crucial insight from the analysis. The language is deliberately flexible. It doesn't automatically mean everyone goes to war instantly.
Okay. It forces a discussion among the members about what action to take, if any. This flexibility, it prioritizes collective political agreement. It allows for a nuanced response, but it also puts the pressure squarely on the allies to actually agree. It tests solidarity, not just a simple tripwire.
That flexibility sounds like it could be a strength, but maybe a weakness too, depending on the situation. How does Russia's internal policy, their worldview, connect to these external moves, especially their view on the global order?
Well, the Putin regime, it definitely harbors this strong sense of rivalry with the existing international order, the one favored by the G7 nations.
Yeah.
It's rooted in dissatisfaction with how things shook out after the Cold War. Their official foreign policy concept from March 2023 openly rejects the rules-based world order.
So what is this rules-based order they're rejecting? Think of it as the international playbook that's mostly been in place since World War II. Agreements on trade, sovereignty, human rights largely shaped by Western democracies. Russia's basically saying, we don't like your playbook, we want to write our own rules, or at least have a much bigger say. And their nuclear strategy reflects this. Documents like their military doctrine spell it out. It's meant to deter threats to Russia's existence, sure, but, and this is key, it also allows for limited first use of nuclear weapons to force an end to a conventional war.
Limited first use in a conventional war. That sounds incredibly risky. Is the insight here that they're signaling a much lower threshold for going nuclear than, say, during the Cold War? Are they changing the rules?
That's exactly it. The core insight is they've formalized a doctrine where nuclear weapons become a more immediate, almost tactical option, not just the absolute last resort. It radically shifts the deterrence landscape. It introduces this profound new danger, and the decision rests solely with the president. They see it as a viable tool to win a conventional fight quickly, on their terms.
Okay, so we've got this escalating tension in Europe with Russia. But as you said, these things aren't happening in a vacuum. Our sources show similar volatility, maybe even more acutely recently, in the Middle East.
Yeah.
It really proves how connected these global flashpoints are. The region was right on the brink just last month.
Absolutely. For a few days there, it really looked like the simmering conflict between Israel and Iran was about to explode into a full-blown regional war. And that could have easily dragged in the U.S. and its allies against, well, potentially a Russia-China axis. We saw actual moves, U.S. airstrikes on Iranian nuclear sites.
Right.
Iran hitting back at a U.S. airbase in Qatar. A U.S.-mediated ceasefire announced by Donald Trump seems to be holding for now, but it was a really chilling preview.
The Middle East, always a powder keg.
Hmm.
But what made this specific flashpoint feel so much more dangerous? So close to actually pulling in the big global players?
Well, the broader context is vital. The region's been in chaos since that Hamas attack on Israel, October 7th, 2023. That led to the Gaza invasion, the weakening of Hezbollah in Lebanon, the fall of Assad in Syria, and then this direct Israel-Iran clash. What we saw was almost like a proxy battle playing out directly, with the U.S.-Iran exchange drawing the lines for a potentially much larger conflict. It's a stark reminder that regional chaos can go global fast.
And the impact of those strikes on Iran's nuclear program.
The Pentagon analysis suggests it only set the program back by maybe 1 to 2 years. It highlights how military action often has a short-term impact on these long-term strategic goals. Talks between the U.S. and Iran are apparently set to resume, but sources say Israeli officials feel confident Trump would back further strikes if Iran ramps up its nuclear ambitions again.
Okay, so Europe, Middle East, intense. But many strategists argue the Asia-Pacific is the real long game, the high-stakes theater that could genuinely reshape global power. What makes that region, especially around Taiwan, such a critical flashpoint for a wider war?
Yeah, the consensus in our sources is pretty clear. The biggest threat to geopolitical stability is widely seen as the rising tension between China and the U.S., specifically over Taiwan. A conflict there, as the Straits Times put it, could force global alignments and push the world to the brink of a third world war. Beijing views Taiwan as, an integral part of China. Their stance has gotten much more aggressive. Meanwhile, the U.S. has increased support, financial, military, rhetorical for Taiwan staying independent.
And if China did move on Taiwan, what are the actual real-world consequences? Beyond the island itself, how does that shake the globe?
Well, politicians, military chiefs, industry leaders, they're saying you just can no longer afford to ignore the prospect of a full-scale invasion. That scenario, it would shake the foundations of the world as we know it. It could very well trigger World War III, likely forcing the U.S. to defend Taiwan. And think about the economy. Taiwan's role in semiconductors is critical. The economic fallout alone would be catastrophic, way beyond the military side.
And North Korea, how do they fit into this complex picture? Are they just a distraction, or do they serve a bigger strategic purpose, maybe for China?
North Korea definitely adds fuel to the fire in the Asia-Pacific. Since 2019, Kim Jong-un has been relentlessly focused on upgrading his nuclear and missile tech. Beginning of 2024, they announced they ditched the idea of a peaceful unification with the South. That led South Korea to scrap a 2018 non-hostility pact. That's a real escalation. Then in April, North Korea tested a new weapons system on a massive warship, a Chohaeon-class ship, capable of launching nuclear ballistic missiles. It really shows their ambition level. Strategically, North Korea's provocations tie up U.S. resources and focus, along with South Korea and Japan. It forces them to maintain a significant military presence there. That creates a multi-front headache for the U.S., potentially pulling attention or assets away from Taiwan. Whether that's intentional coordination with China or just convenient timing, it arguably serves Beijing's interests.
It's becoming really clear these aren't isolated crises. They're deeply interconnected. So let's unpack that connection more. How exactly do China and Russia's strategies weave together? And how's the U.S. trying to counter this growing alignment?
What's fascinating, really, is China's strategic shift. For years after the Cold War, they mostly sought cooperation with the U.S. But then, around the late 2000s, something changed fundamentally. China started actively working to transform the U.S.-led international order to better secure its own core interests, pushing back against Western ideas of universal values. And in this new vision, Russia is seen as, well, an indispensable partner.
And they're backing this vision with military muscle.
Oh, absolutely. China's rapidly strengthening its military, especially what's called anti-accessory denial capabilities, or A2AD. Think of it like creating a highly dangerous defensive bubble around key areas like Taiwan, making it incredibly costly and risky for forces like the U.S. Navy to operate inside that zone. Plus, they're massively building up their nuclear arsenal. Projections show them reaching 1,500 warheads by 2035. That would put them on par with the U.S. and Russia under existing treaty limits.
And it's not just about building up forces, right? Our sources mention some pretty bold actions against U.S. ships and planes.
That's right. They've repeatedly engaged in provocative acts. We're talking Chinese naval ships dangerously cutting off U.S. vessels. The USS Impeccable in '09, Cowpens in '13, Decatur in '18, Changhoon in '23 in the Taiwan Strait. And their military jets making dangerous intercepts of U.S. reconnaissance planes like in 2014 and 2023. It's this constant pushing of boundaries, a dangerous game of chicken, really. It skirts the edge of conflict without quite tipping over.
So this collaboration, it's tangible. Military exercises, potentially even nuclear help. Does it seem like a totally unified front? Or do the sources hint at any cracks, any friction between Russia and China?
Outwardly, at least, it looks largely unified based on our sources. They've deepened their strategic cooperation through frequent joint military drills, Peace Mission, Joint Sea. These happen annually, not just near China, but even in the Mediterranean and Baltic Seas, which is a clear signal aimed at NATO. China's military, the PLA, started joining Russia's big Vostok exercises in 2018. That was a major turning point. And they kept participating even after the invasion of Ukraine. Now they routinely conduct joint strategic air patrols and joint maritime patrols near Japan. And here's a really alarming detail. Russia has supplied highly enriched uranium to China for its CFR 600 fast breeder reactors.
Fast breeder reactors.
Yeah.
Why is that significant?
Well, these reactors are particularly concerning because they can produce more fissile material, like plutonium, than they consume, and that plutonium can be used to make more nuclear weapons. The U.S. sees this as Russia directly helping China ramp up its nuclear weapons production. It's a huge red flag for Washington.
Okay, so given this very real, growing China-Russia alignment, how is the United States responding? What's their strategy to manage this dual challenge and maintain stability?
The Biden administration clearly sees China as its most consequential geopolitical challenge, with Russia labeled an acute threat. Their core strategy is focused on preserving the existing rules-based international order, arguing it's brought decades of stability and prosperity. Militarily, the U.S. is adapting significantly. They're pushing concepts like Joint All-Domain Operations, JADO. That means integrating everything space, cyber, land, sea, air for faster, more synchronized actions. The goal is decision superiority, basically, outthinking and outmaneuvering adversaries across all domains. This also includes preparing for gray zone activities.
Gray zone, what falls under that?
Think coercive tactics that stop just short of traditional warfare. Aggressive cyber attacks, maybe economic pressure, using maritime militias to harass shipping things designed to achieve goals without triggering an outright military response. China, for instance, explicitly talks about aiming to win without fighting using these kinds of methods.
So it's about outmaneuvering without necessarily escalating to full conflict.
Yeah.
What about their nuclear stance? With China and Russia building up, is the U.S. matching them weapon for weapon?
That's a really crucial point. While the U.S. is modernizing its aging nuclear triad, the missiles, subs, bombers, the Biden administration has explicitly said they will not expand the number of nuclear weapons in response. The core idea, the insight here, is they believe they don't need numerical superiority to deter effectively. They need a flexible, credible deterrent strategy. They're also heavily focused on strengthening alliances, Japan, South Korea, Australia, the Philippines, and boosting multilateral groups like the Quad, U.S., Japan, India, Australia, and AUKUS, Australia, UK, US. Even NATO is taking a more proactive stance on Indo-Pacific security now, recognizing these challenges are all globally linked.
Wow. This deep dive has certainly given us a Well, a sobering but absolutely crucial look at the global strategic landscape.
Hmm.
It really feels like the world is reevaluating the entire international order, driven by these competing ambitions.
Indeed. You've got the US and its allies trying to maintain one system, and China and Russia pushing for a fundamentally different future through their deepening cooperation. The big question is whether changes to the status quo by force can be prevented, or if we're heading towards major military actions reshaping the world as we know it.
So, thinking about everything we've discussed,
Mm.
what stands out most to you about how interconnected these global flashpoints are? How do you see these dynamics playing out? And what's the most critical thing needed to maintain some semblance of peace in such a volatile world? It's a really complex picture, and understanding all these moving parts feels more important than ever. We'd love to hear your thought. What do you think? Let us know down in the comment section. And if you found this deep dive valuable, please do like, share, and subscribe to the Global WarWatch Network. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into the world's most critical issues.